Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon. It's gorgeous outside. And thanks for the panelists for joining us today. As we've heard throughout the summit, climate change is a serious issue, and we need to get big things done to both mitigate it and adapt to it. In a democracy, big things don't get done if we're divided. And the alternative democracy, of course, isn't good either. Autocratic countries don't have good records on either climate change or human rights. So we have to work together across political and other divides in this country if we're going to address the climate challenge. There's simply no other option. This fact has been a key motivator for me in my research and outreach on bridging political divides on and off campus, especially related to climate change. And when it comes to finding common ground on climate change, youth give me a lot of hope. And so I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists for today's panel on youth bipartisan climate advocacy. Starting at the end, working in, Jamika Hodnett is the Green for All campaign director of Dream.org, the nonprofit founded by Van Jones, whose mission is to address pressing problems in our society, such as mass incarceration, climate change, and economic opportunity in disadvantaged communities. As you will hear from Jamika, Dream is also a coalition-building organization that, as she said, leads with love and builds bridges across divides. Lucero Cantu is the digital director of the American Conservation Coalition, or ACC. ACC is a nonprofit organization dedicated to mobilizing young people around environmental action through common sense, market-based, and limited government ideals. It is one of a handful of organizations founded by young conservatives eager to address climate change, and its leaders were influential in the establishment of the Conservative Climate Caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives, which is now one of the largest caucuses in the House. Sarah Jensen is a CU Boulder Masters of Environment, or MENV student, who founded the Boulder chapter of ACC and has previously worked with ACC on some of their national efforts and attended COP. And in fact, at this most recent COP in Egypt, the ACC and Dream were two of the organizers of the Building Bridges Summit, which Jamika and Lucero, and as well as Chris, who was here last night, all attended. M. Nocido is a PhD candidate in environmental studies at CU Boulder, who studies marine conservation in the high seas. Part of her research involves observing United Nations negotiations related to high seas governance. And M is also an accomplished communicator and advocate, having worked with the Oceans Group of the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, and founded her own UN-sponsored youth-oriented NGO called 10 by 2020. And so I'm thrilled to have such an accomplished panel here today, and I'm especially thrilled to have such accomplished CU Boulder students whose talents and expertise we can share with you all. And so I want to start, one of the lifebloods of building bridges is empathy and understanding. And so in that spirit, what I'd like to start with is just to ask each of you briefly describe your work on climate change, but also what motivates you personally. And maybe let's go back this way, so starting with M.
Hi, yeah, I'm M. Nocido. And I never saw myself as an advocate growing up. It was never something that I kind of sought out, but it was. Okay, there we go. So I never really saw myself in an advocacy position until I got to undergrad. And it was there that I realized that I had a very small worldview and I wanted to learn from other people. And that's how I fell kind of into climate change and climate advocacy specifically, because to me it is the largest problem that we're all facing. It's something that I think we can all relate to, and we've all experienced in some capacity in our lives. And it's also, to me, an opportunity specifically for youth advocacy, because there is this moment where you have that realization where the thing that you see, whether it's the forest or the ocean that you love, is not going to look that way when you are in it. Your children will likely not experience it the same way. And so that mixture of urgency and the feeling that you can do something about it even at a young age, to me, was extremely important.
you, Sarah.
Awesome, and I think everything that you just said, but recently what's motivated me and like the work that I've done with ACC and through my capstone project is meeting people on the ground and seeing how passionate they are and how much they care, and they're taking steps to address the climate crisis, and they're not being told to do it. They're doing it because they care. And through the ACC, we do a lot of volunteering, and so I've been able to meet a lot of these what I call like silent climate heroes. We have worked with some local farmers that are not being told to implement regenerative agriculture, but they're doing it, and they're taking a huge risk by doing it, but they're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do. And so I think that's what really motivates me, at least recently.
Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, so my work with the American Conservation Coalition is very specific to climate communications as well as grassroots mobilization. I spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to figure out how we can string together the right form of words, use the right meme to help people understand both what is happening in this world and how we can destigmatize a lot of this maybe science-heavy, political-heavy jargon to help people have a greater understanding of climate action and how they themselves can participate. And so with that, I often say that my politics and my sense of political ideology comes from lived experience and what I believe is right. And I think within that, I have a lot of reverence for respect for humanity, respect for fellow man. And I think that giving people the opportunity to have clean air, clean water, just the basic foundation for them to be able to live a successful, healthy, happy, fruitful life, to me is a very basic, I think, respect that we owe each other and that I am fighting for with the American Conservation Coalition.
Thank you. Adika.
Yeah, so I'll just start a little bit with my background. So I'm originally from Roanoke, Virginia, and I got involved in climate and environment.
and talking to other students and students that are not just in your department. Getting that diversity of views, not just across the aisle in terms of where we lie on our politics, but also chatting with people who have different takes on environmentalism. Environmental and climate change is an intersection of so many other aspects. And so I think working across the aisle would be interesting to have more of these events, to scale it down and to get a lot more people invested, and showing that this is a worthy cause to work with your counterparts, to work with people who might have different ideas than your own, because at the end of the day, the purpose of a college is to learn, and you'll be learning from your peers, from the other people that you would be interacting with.
Yeah, I think that, and hopefully at some point this conversation gets into the classroom. I think that colleges are an amazing place to workshop ideas and challenge each other so that we can get to the best idea, because this is, in my opinion, one of the most complex challenges that we've ever faced as humans, and just having one way of solving it and just having one idea doesn't seem like that's how you solve a big problem like this. And so hopefully at some point it's in the classroom and we're able to debate and have a civil discourse. I think sometimes in classrooms we shy away from having these conversations because we're so polarized right now. And I think that's like, we're doing a huge disservice to ourselves by not having these hard conversations here, because we're hoping that these ideas are ready to go when we start to implement them, and that there's no holes in them, and that they're really like the best idea, and that they're actually going to do something. So I hope that that would actually get into the classroom at some point, and we can have that conversation.
Thanks. So just one short follow-up for the two of you. You talked about how, you know, we should have more of this. We should be able to do this. We should be able to engage people. Why aren't we doing it already? What do we need to overcome to get there? Maybe Sarah and then.
The first thing that comes to mind is a bit of fear, I think.
Absolutely. I was going to say the same
yeah,
thing.
and like I think that I fall victim to it as well. I think in the classroom I just kind of stay quiet, right? Because I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want friends to like make assumptions about me and just, you know, maybe not want to be my friend. Because at the end of the day, my classmates are also my friends outside, and so I think that I also fall victim to that. And so I think maybe each of us just, I don't know, maybe getting into those conversations and like really being brave, and maybe we need to lead the charge on that and just step out of, I don't know, that fear that we're in.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I was going to say the exact same thing. Especially as a graduate student, these are your peers, but they're also your future colleagues, and people that you really respect and have expertise. And I think also a little bit that plays into it is imposter syndrome. Along with that is an opinion is an opinion, and I like to think that's rooted in fact, but I can be wrong, and I have been wrong. And I think admitting that you're wrong on certain facts that are then fueling your opinions. And I think it's also very taboo to say that your opinions on something has changed as you've learned and as you've grown as a person and as an academic. And so I think, yeah, that we need the bravery, and I think we also need to overcome that fear, absolutely.
Thank you both. Okay, so coming back to Jamika and Lucero, and as a previous to this, I have to admit I don't really like completely the narrative that the older generations wreck the world and the younger generations are going to fix it. I think youthful energy is great, but I think also it's true that the last 100 years have been dramatically, I've seen dramatic improvements in every element of well-being in basically every place. However, when we're talking about bipartisanship on climate change, I have to say that the polls show that the youth really are leading this. And I think that your organizations are examples of that. And so if it's the case that if you accept my premise, and feel free to challenge it in the spirit of what these two just said, that youth are doing a better job at finding common ground across the aisle on climate change, why do you think that is? And do you think that suggests a hopeful or positive outlook on the future of bipartisanship more broadly? Maybe Jamika and then Lucero.
Yeah, for me, I agree with your premise, and I think that youth are really just finding our way back to what we were doing before, like really getting along across divides, trying to ensure that our legislators pass policies that are encompassing of both right and left ideologies. That's something that had been going on for, hundreds of years up until, very recently. I think around like the early 2000s. And so we're just like taking it back a step and saying, hey, this issue is too big for us not to find, again, some common ground on. And so how do we do that? How do we get into the nitty gritty? So I guess right now we'll take it and say, yes, we are doing a better job. Also I also think that that youth energy is more likely to actually engage in some of the harder conversations and raise our voices and do the hard things of maybe ruffling some feathers and yelling from the top of our lungs, in some places. And that, for me, in terms of working on climate, has really gotten the ball rolling instead of, staying at a stalemate. And so maybe it's also that energy of willing to say the thing or do the tough thing that is also influencing some of the current resurgence we're seeing around bipartisanship.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that was told to me about a year ago from polling just generally done about young people and their sentiments towards environment is that for young people, environmentalism isn't an issue, it's a value. Mm-hmm. It's an inherent way of understanding the earth. And in many ways, it's very similar to other issues where young people largely consider them settled, but older generations are still debating these issues. And I think because of that, you can also almost see this togetherness that comes from young people, not in a togetherness in the sense that we all, because we're young, we all agree with each other and we all have this exact same policy views and positions. But I think there is a togetherness in the sense that we all are going to be here for the long run. We're going to deal with the effects of climate change moving forward, regardless of even if you're politically inclined at all. And so I think because of that, there is a likelihood to come together because of just a shared issue that's impacting us all that I think some generations aren't able to tap into because either climate change is just a very new issue for them in general, or because it's not a collective identity issue among their generation that it is with younger generations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. So unfortunately, taking it down a little bit, coming back to the two of you, so for Em and Sarah, a recent study by the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology found that young Americans in college are more politically polarized on average than the rest of the country, including compared to just other young people who are not in college. And I would say quite worryingly that polarization was higher not just along the lines of Democrat-Republican, but also along the lines of race, gender, and sexual orientation. And so does this resonate with your experience? And if so, how can we combat this? And is there a role for climate in particular as an issue to bring some of this together? I can't remember who started last time, so whoever wants to go first.
Sure. I think with what I was talking about earlier, it definitely resonates. I think that there is definitely a strong polarization on campuses, especially in the environmental studies kind of area, just because not historically, but just recently, kind of the left has dominated, and so the work we're doing at the ACC is trying to bring that voice back. And so definitely resonates with me. I do think, what Lucera was saying, that climate, I think, is an opportunity for us to come together because I think as young people, we share sort of that urgency and we see our future that this is what we're going to have to live in. And so I think we all deeply, deeply care about this issue. And I think if we each understand that that we care about that future and that the reason we have our positions is because we want to make it the world a better place and we want to have a brighter future, that hopefully this could be where we bridge that divide.
Thanks. Em?
I'm not surprised by that. To me, college is where you're starting to form your sense of self. Mm-hmm. You are coming to a place and meeting people from different states, countries, from different schools, and who have different ideologies. And it is also a place where you are finally a capital A adult. You can form your own opinions. You can choose to go to climate strikes. You can choose your own classes and what you're learning. And with that, I think comes a sense of also polarization, because now you are starting to self-identify with politics, self-identify with race, with your sexuality, with your gender expression. And so I don't find it surprising, but I think that the way that we combat that is through the college environment still to this day. So again, going back to having more of these types of events, and addressing the intersectionalities, especially that come with environmentalism. I think a lot of environmental justice and racial justice. I think a lot of queer theory and environmentalism and the intersections that happen there. And I think because climate change and climate issues are so large and broad, that there is a way to put that into every classroom, every conversation, and recognizing that it's something that affects us all, albeit not necessarily equally.
Great, thank you both. Okay, so one last question for each of you, and then we'll move to an audience Q&A. And we started a little bit late, so I think we have a little bit more time than one. So for Jamika and Lucero, I'm struck by, and I would say the same thing about Chris, that the three of you, actually I would also say the same about Congressman Neguse, the four of you are, in fact, all of you are incredibly accomplished given your age, right? Intimidatingly so, I would say, as a not that much older than you person. And so, and in particular, in this space, in this type of advocacy. And so for the two of you, what advice would you give to other young people on how to work better across the aisle, either on climate change or anything else? Yeah. Maybe Lucero and then Jamika.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's really important. It's really similar to something you said earlier that sorry, struck me, which is about like entering these spaces with openness, but also really being grounded in yourself, and really taking the time to understand what you stand for and what value you're contributing into these rooms. And that's not to say that you're going into a specific room to sell an ideology or sell a specific set of policies, but I think really coming in with a sense of who you are, what you stand for, what you seek to accomplish, really helps get rid of these barriers around whether or not someone's of your political party, or maybe they're using the right phrases or the right verbiage that aligns with certain partisan just brandings that I think all of us are pretty familiar with today. And so I would just really encourage you to just take the time to really just be grounded in yourself, never sell like that guiding light within you short, because it really is an important way for you to build common ground regardless of ideology or political party.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, similar to what you said, like we are building a robust climate and environmental movement, and that's going to take people from all sides really marching together under the same beat and really getting us to solutions. And I've just been working on this issue and just been in the trenches, and it's just been a really difficult uphill battle. It's like pushing a boulder, and so just to be on this panel and seeing all of this energy has been really enlightening. And so what I would say to young people looking to get involved is find your political home and let those be your people, but then also go and find other organizations that you can collaborate with, that you can build bonds with, that don't necessarily have the same sort of views or ideology as you, and really sort of build a bigger, broader sort of base. I always tell people what you have, or what power comes into two things: organized people or organized money. And so with us, we're organizing people, and so that's our bread and butter. And so how can you find your people and build with other people who have found their people, and really sort of propel this movement forward?
Thank you both. And I am interested in hearing your answers to the same question, but I also wanted to ask you, following up on a question I asked you earlier, basically about how can we have better conversations on campus. And the two of you talked a lot about what students can do. And that's great, but it's also not completely fair, because the fostering an environment where people can have constructive conversations across the aisle, is our job, is the faculty's job. If you all can help, that's awesome, but it's our job. And so I want to ask the two of you, how can we do our job better? Who wants to go first?
I think a lot of times, I think I kind of touched on this a little bit, but in the class, we end up kind of just lecturing, and whenever it kind of gets into a debate, everyone just goes, oh, we're not picking sides, anyway, let's just keep going, and we just don't get into it at all, and there's not a lot of room in classes to debate, and I know that I have classmates that do want to debate and talk and work through all these ideas, but it's like we're worried or scared about having that conversation in the classrooms, and so I think if faculty members knew that we wanted to have those conversations and made time in class for that would really help.
Thanks. Em?
I agree, and I think also more breathing room in class, especially when you're doing work in environmentalism, in climate change, it can get very dark and deep very quickly, and so making sure that there is that space to take a breath, especially after a class discussion. And I think also small group work, I'm personally a huge fan of, because it's a lot easier to have this conversation among 4 people than all of us together. And so having those small groups and then having someone report out takes off a lot of the pressure and takes away a little bit of the fear that comes with expressing your opinions or having those lively and useful debates. For sure. And I think, making more space for that and intentional space. I think sometimes class discussions can get heated and go off the rails and off topic or can spiral out of control. Making sure that it is as controlled as possible and everyone's going into that class knowing that's what we'll be talking about and that it's an okay thing to talk about and that it's safe as well.
Thank you both very much. So I think we have some time. I'm not sure exactly how much time, but I think we probably have at least 15 minutes for audience questions. So can I use this mic? Is that?
Okay.
We've
got a runner.
So if you want to ask a question, why don't you come up to the aisle and just line up, and we'll have a question.
So hi, I'm Ann. I live here in Boulder. Got to hear Jamaica last night. So let's see. So a couple of observations. Doing outreach to like-age people. Can you let me be youth? Right? Yeah, because, and the reason I ask it this way is the generation of women who have been in the workforce, raised a family, everybody's off earning a living now or having kids or whatever. So I've got energy, I've got some time now. So, and I do feel like this is, climate touches every single being on earth, every plant. And so I feel energized about it. So kind of think about that question. Is youth only limited to an age group? Okay. All right. I love hearing grounded in self. It's important for any effort that you're doing. And I celebrate that. It sounds like we need to sell collaboration. Right? That's going to be the secret. And I love your idea about small group discussion in class. I would have, when I was an undergrad at CU, I was majoring in English and we discussed a lot, right? But all lecture, that wouldn't have done enough for me. So I celebrate, thank you for asking that question from the faculty perspective. That would be in the small group discussion is very enriching for people. So that was basically, I wanted to tell you guys, yay. And thank you for doing what you're doing. And because dream, that concept, very important for all generations, right? So keep that good work up.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wants to respond to that?
Here's somebody in a Carhartt, right? He works outside.
If anyone wants to respond to that, go ahead.
I can respond to the youth. From the UN perspective, anyone under the age of 30 is considered youth. I know, I'm so sorry. So sorry. So that's for the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. That is our cutoff, technically. And so MGCY functions as a country in that we have a stake in a vote as a country, but instead of representing a national perspective, we represent everyone under the age of 30, regardless of where they live, which is a huge undertaking. That being said, I do think youth is a sense of mind and a sense of feeling, and I know I work quite a lot with several people who have retired from their jobs, or their kids are older and they're looking for something to do, and this is a good outlet for that energy. And I absolutely agree that climate touches all of us, and that it's, to me, one of the most tangible ways to make an impact on your world, both in the sense of repairing your world, and also I think a lot of the Marshall Fire that happened last year, and how the community came together in light of that tragedy to get toys for kids, to help start rebuilding, to raise the funds. And that was largely done by, I would consider, non-youth, by older people, older adults over the age of 30. So yeah, I think if you have the energy and you have the brain space and you have the time, this is absolutely the place for everyone to be in.
Does anyone else want to respond?
Sure, I am happy to. Yeah, so I don't fall in the under 30 bucket, but I got a young face, so. But I really liked what you hearkened to, and this thing, I know this is a youth panel, but really just trying to think about building a multi-generational movement. I think that there's a lot we can learn from social movements far beyond 60s, 70s, even beyond that we could be utilizing right now, that we don't necessarily have that sort of generational knowledge infused into our work. And so definitely extremely open to learning, to exploring, and to figuring out like what roles we could be playing for one another across the climate and environmental movement. I think it's absolutely imperative that like we get some of that knowledge into our current work today.
Thank you. And whatever the UN says, my personal self-serving definition of youth is 35 and under.
Okay. I'll write to them. I don't know.
I think, do either of you want to respond to that, or should we take another question?
Another question?
Other question?
Thanks so much. I'm curious, both for DREAM's perspective and the ACC's perspective. What's your take on lobbying, and how are you communicating with your members or potential members on voting specifically? And I'm mostly curious about ACC's like theory and how you're communicating to youth with the knowledge that the Republican Party has stopped a lot of climate legislation over the years. Like, and maybe that's like too far to say, but that's been an understanding that I've had in my personal work. And so, yeah, I'm just super curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think going back to something that you mentioned at the beginning, Matt, which is that right now the largest caucus in the U.S. Congress is the Conservative Climate Caucus. It boasts about over 100 members. And so I think to your point, first of all, I want to say I think you are right in terms of like, you know, a lot of Republicans' reputations, both in terms of like what they've literally done as well as what they've said around climate change. I think most of us who can forget like the famous like the Imhoff like snowball in the middle of like the congressional floor like imagery. And so I think for us, we do a lot of work to talk about how your values and how like your worldview in the world is not an inhibitor to climate change. Your quintessential ACC activist oftentimes comes to us and says, you know, I thought that I had to be a liberal because I support the environment, because I believe in climate change. And so a lot of our work is really dispelling individuals of this notion. And we talk to young people about, one, the Republican Party's past. And so, for example, it was Nixon that established the EPA. It was Teddy Roosevelt that established national parks. And so I think we talk a lot about the work that we do is very specific to bringing that Republican Party back to its conservation roots and really being the generation that ushers in a rebirth of this era of what the Republican Party once was. And so we actually do have a couple members of Congress that we work with very closely, and that, you know, will go on hikes with our activists. We'll do meetings with them to talk about whether it's a specific set of policy solutions, like natural climate solutions, so using nature to fight climate change, or just like meeting with them just to hold space with them and show that, like, you know, there are young people that are willing to vote for you, a Republican. I know, crazy, right? If you support these issues that they say that they care about. And so really putting young people in front of Republicans and showing them that they have a constituency and they have a base if they listen to these young people, and inversely showing these young conservatives that they do have the power to bring in like that new era of a conservation Republican movement is kind of this back and forth that we do like with our grassroots work for young people.
Yeah. I don't think I have much to add to that. What I can say is, I mean, like I said, like you're absolutely not lying, and also being personally being a lobbyist. Yeah, there have been plenty of bills that I've brought to both Democrats and Republicans, and you know, it's been hard to get Republican support. And so one of the things, you know, we're super excited about the IRA, but we want to continue on that momentum. But it's about like finding the right piece of legislation all the time, and so constantly balancing that about like, okay, what can we, my job is really to persuade legislators. So I usually am going after the people that I think are persuadable. And so, you know, there are just a handful of Republican legislators that are persuadable, and I go after them. And I leave it up to the ACC folks to really try to bring us some more that we can persuade.
Sarah, did you want to respond to that, or?
No, I think everything that Lucero said. I guess I could just add that I guess it was like in November, our branch met with Joe O'Dea, and he like did a trash cleanup with us, and he was really interested. And he was running for Senate.
Against Michael
just
Bennet.
to make that clear. And he was really interested in what we were doing. He was really happy that we were doing it, and so I think it is shifting.
And did you want to address that?
I've never lobbied, so.
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, I think though, like, again, the action can be across the aisle. So for example, in this last election, I was working with Vote Forward, and so just really even just sending letters asking people to vote, whether it was one way or the other. We were not saying you should vote this way on this, but actually just going out and voicing your opinion in whatever way they felt comfortable, I think is also a very important thing. And I think that also comes back to the fear of you know, talking about how you voted or being afraid of being judged by your peers or colleagues or friends or family. But I have never lobbied in my life.
Thank you. Okay, let's take one more question from Chris. Go ahead.
When I was a young teenager, the Vietnam War was going on. And campuses all across the country had thousands of people out 4 or 5 days a week protesting the Vietnam War. When I was in college, it was all about apartheid in South Africa, half a world away, that affected maybe 100,000 people. And now here we are. You've all said we're in an existential crisis. And Friday, there was a march that was about divesting and investing. There was maybe, I think, less than 100 of us. Now, I know that this is the last week of class coming up and finals, but even before COVID, when it was nice, warm, sunny day, we'd gather on the steps of Norland, and there'd be maybe 200 people at the most. So now Vietnam was a half a world away. South Africa was a half a world away. Now it's right here in our backyard. And so why aren't more young people out there protesting, whether they're left, right, or center, fighting for their very lives?
Who wants to take that first? Thank you for the question.
I can get started. So I can definitely say that we are out there. I can't, you know, right now at this current moment say about the numbers, but I think it is, you know, converging in different ways, and young people are showing up in different ways. Like, I think I've worked on some pretty mass mobilizations, like People's Climate Movement and People's Climate March, both of those, and the Youth Climate Strikes with organization called 0 Hour. And so a lot of my work is around mobilization and getting people out into the streets and really just, having their voices heard. And so I could say that probably because, in 2020 and the racial justice uprising and the protests around that, I mean, some of the largest mass mobilizations we've seen in history. And I think that what folks are trying to figure out now is, what else can we do? What else is going to come from the protests? Because we continuously mobilize, and then how does that culminate in some sort of policy or legislation, or how does that push a particular legislator? I think that those mobilizations meant a lot more to legislators than they do now. I feel like that legislators can sort of shirk responsibility in a way that they might didn't be able to used to do. And so I think that the answer really for us right now is trying to figure out how to be more creative with our activism. Because for me, being a mobilizer, protest just isn't landing in the same way. And so, yeah, that's just my perspective.
Do we just go down the line?
Yeah, and I think to that I would also add that that's like a really important aspect of it, because I think the reality of that question is that I don't think that there is one ultimate factor, but multiple contributing ones. Because I think another part of this that we also need to take into account when it comes to just like a young person's day-to-day life is that they wake up and then they're automatically inundated with a mass amount of notifications about the new tragedy in the state over, the new tragedy in the country over, the new tragedy on the other side of the world. And it's just, I think there's also just like this feeling amongst young people of, we talked a little bit about like the apathy that can sometimes come with climate change, but I think, and climate action, but I think it's also like an overall apathy that young people can sometimes experience by being just so connected to everything, wanting to be a part of everything, and just being very in tune with the world in a way that I just think the world has become so much smaller for the average young person, as opposed to the instances that you gave in your example. For example, it was there was like no like larger social media echo chamber that was also but there's the Vietnam War, and by the way, like this happened down the street, and also this happened over there, and that happened over there, and so it's just like this. I think the atmosphere for activism is also just like a lot noisier overall for your average activist.
Yeah, I feel like I might echo the way that we're showing up. I think youth are showing up, but again, like we've been doing this climate change thing for decades, and I think kind of also going back to what I was talking about, people just taking charge. Instead of going out in the streets, like our branch is going and helping a local farm implement one of their regenerative ag projects, or we're doing a trash cleanup, and we're actually just doing the thing instead of, yelling and trying to make somebody hear us. Like we're done with that a little bit. Like we just want to do the actual actionable thing and meeting with our legislators. And so I think maybe we're showing up like that more often now. But I think that's just my perspective. Yeah.
Similarly, and this is just my own personal take, I think one of the most frustrating things is it's affecting all of us, and there are so many different people to blame. I can't blame one specific. I'm not going to target Exxon. I'm not going to target United and Delta. There's so many people to blame that it almost gets overwhelming on how am I going to tackle this? Am I going to go and protest Exxon? Am I going to write to people that, Monsanto? And there are so many different ways to be angry about it that it almost stops you in your tracks before you can go to a climate march, or before you can sign a petition, or before you can go and do a cleanup. And I think that and also thinking of, I was in 7th grade when Hurricane Katrina hit. I was in my first year and I'm from New Jersey when Superstorm Sandy wiped out my state. I was here last year for the fire. It is so much on top of each other that you get overwhelmed and you don't know what to do. Who do you blame for a wildfire? You can't particularly blame one person for years and decades of circumstances that have led to this drought, that have led to a lack of fire adaptation and planning. And so I think that that's also what stops people. But I think the way to combat that is by doing actions, by doing cleanups, by finding small ways to overcome that overwhelming sense of doom and dread.
So we're out of time. I want to try to end on a high note. So just really quickly, going down the line, 20 seconds max, what gives you hope? Starting with Ann.
Oh, we're starting with me. My goodness, what gives me hope? All the amazing people that I work with as a graduate student. I'm in the environmental studies department. We are tackling these difficult questions. We're trying to work across the aisle. We're working in policy and social sciences and natural sciences. And so I'm actively working with and am part of this new generation of leaders. And from my experiences, we're going to kick butt.
Great. Sarah.
I think maybe just echoing what I said earlier, just meeting people on the ground like us here, the people that I work with in the community that are just taking charge and doing it themselves. And like they're not doing it because they're being told, they're doing it because they really do care. And so I think there's a lot of us out there, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, just really taking a step back and thinking about the people that aren't even in this room and the industries that aren't even represented, right? There are people, there are entrepreneurs, there are like private investment firms. There are just like so many different individuals tackling this problem from so many different angles that it's really exciting to think about the emerging technologies, like all like for example, I believe like that, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, so bear with me, but there was like a device invented for collecting plastic that was invented by like this young man.
Cleanup.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's like small things like that where people often like look to government to save us from like these like large problems, which I think is definitely part of the equation. But also what's going to save us are these individuals in their basements inventing, like the next solution to figuring out how we, get rid of an invasive species or clean up our oceans. And so like I think that really gives me hope, just thinking about like the fact that there are so many people like on every corner of this planet thinking about this right now.
Mika.
Yeah, for me, I've been working on this since 2009. So, started in college and just kept working and there's been several different ebbs and flows. We think that we got something with the Clean Power Plan, that doesn't go through. We think we got something with the Paris Agreement, that doesn't go through. But then we get the IRA, and I've just seen at so many different angles and points where, I was going to lean into despair that there have been things that have come about, different solutions, different policies that have come into place, and so much has changed. Like in 2009, I couldn't get a politician to even get on stage and say climate. It was so taboo. And so now to see it that, we do have a president in office that just passed this multi-billion-dollar IRA bill, and we have politicians like coming together, and we have people like you all on this stage that are really talking to Republican legislators and getting them to take action and being involved. Like I just seen so much change over the last, 12, 13 years. And so I think that gives me a lot of hope.
Well, great. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much to our panel. Please give them a round of applause. I'm so thrilled that you all could come here, that 2 of you are always here, and 3 of you are local to the Front Range. We hope that Jamika will come visit us again.
Yeah.
And as I said in closing the last time I did a panel like this, thank you for letting a Canadian talk to you about your political problems.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.